Hi everyone, my name is Omega Jacob, and today we have the question on our table. The question state what were the causes or the reason for the abolition of slave trade. So for a student, first of all you need to know the key term. For the question of today, the key term is abolition of slave trade. This was the act or the process of stopping the uses of slaves and slavery in the world. Actually, it started 1807. By this year, Britain campaigned for the abolition of slave trade in the world. By this time, it was during the triangular slave trade or transatlantic slave trade during 18th century. So before going on to the points, let me give you a background of slave trade and slavery. Actually, the far back for 15th century, in which we experience early contact between Africa, Europe, and Middle East and Far East. The Portuguese, the Spanish sailor, the so-called Christopher Columbus, arrived in West Africa and managed to uprooted multi-million of slaves to Southern America. And the same year, Christopher Columbus managed to discover a new world, which is currently called United States of America. So for that reason, they introduced plantation and mines in America. So there were need of laborers there because at first they tested indigenous of America, Red Indians failed, and then they test European white labor, failed. So they decided to pick slaves from African continent so as to provide labor in plantation and in mines. But apart from that, also slaves were taken to Europe, were taken to Asia, and their job was dealing with domestic activities, mines and plantation. Also in Arabic states, they have the same job. So let's dive on the root causes for the abolition of slave trade. So to me, the first reason is called Frenchy sugar competition. This was between British and French. Actually, French, they used West Indies, which is currently called the French Antilles. There they produce sugar at they produce sugar and sold at cheaper price, and also they managed to dominate European market. And for the Britain also, they produced the sugar and sold at a higher price and failed to dominate the market. And this what made British people to seek the alternative way for competing with French, and they decided to abolish slave. Why? It was because by abolishing slave trade, it would deny labor in French West Indies production, because French depended on slaves to produce sugar. So the act of stopping the use of slave, this is directly to disable French production, and again it managed to bounce back the British domination over European market. So for this reason, they decided to abolish slave trade. Another reason is the role of economists. Here we speak about the role of Adam Smith and the role of Malthus Thomas. This was 1766 up to 1834. These people find out like slave labor wasn't profitable. They advise people to use a free labor, because free labor can produce much more, way far from slave labor. So for this, we see a British West Indies slave master abandoned the use of slaves and decided to go seeking for free labor so as to involve in production. So for that reason also, they campaigned for abolition of slave trade. Another point is the role of religion or religious people. These people see like they lack much support, especially from Africans, because their thoughts were quite different to their way they are treating them. Their thought was contrary to the way their fellow Africans were treated. So in order for them to get attention from African, they decided to campaign for the abolition of slave trade so as their good message of God could make sense to the African. So for this reason, they decided to campaign for the abolition of slave trade. Here we see people like John Wesley and Samuel Johnson from United States of America. These two people win much support from every corner of the world. Another reason is the role of American independence and French Revolution. This happened since 1776 and 1789. So these two, American independence and French Revolution, spoke a good message to the people. They spoke about liberty, which means total freedom. Again, they speak about fraternity. This is a sense of brotherhood, and also they speak about equality. So all of these principles went against the use of slaves, being similar to any other commodity. So for this reason, American independence and French Revolution, their message gained much support from the people, and most of the people vote for the abolition of slave trade. So again, we have another reason, which is called the role of philosophers and writers. Here we see people like Jean Jacques Rousseau and many others went against, or they spoke bad of slave trade and slavery, because these people were the lovers of peace, equality, and freedom, and they pictured this slave trade and slavery was against their their message to the people. So they wrote much, they wrote negative, they commented bad of slave trade and slavery. So for this role of philosophers and writers gained much support from the world, and the world decided to abolish slave trade. So the last point for today is the role of industrial revolution. As you know, the role of industrial revolution started with the invention of machine, in which they replaced machine replaced a human labor. So there were no longer a need of using slaves. Instead, they decided to use machines. So for this, they decided to abolish slave trade. In another way, in industrial revolution, there was a rise of class industrialists. These people, these people saw there must be a need of stopping the using of slaves, send them back to Africa so as they could be able to produce this palm oil, because palm oil would help them to run their factories, to run their industry. So they stopped the using of slaves in French West Indies so as to let them back home in Africa to produce palm oil. For so I have been mentioning and explaining the reason for abolition of slave trade, and again I want to show you the stages in which it was used to abolish slave trade within East Africa. Actually, abolition of slave trade in East Africa involved three stages. The first one was called Moresby Treaty. This was done in 1822. By the time the British governor of Mauritius sent Captain Fairfax Moresby to pursue this anti-slavery treaty. This treaty wanted French to stop taking slaves from Mauritius and Reunion, and again the treaty forbidden the action of taking out slaves outside the East Africa. And the second treaty, a Hamilton Treaty of 1845. This was done between Captain Hamilton Atkins with Sultan of Zanzibar, Sultan Said. Here, the aim of this treaty was to stop the taking out of slaves outside of East Africa. And the last one, it was called Frail Treaty. This was conducted by Sir Bartle Frail in 1873 and Sultan Balgash. Here, the treaty restricted the act of using slaves in mainland, even in Sultan possession. And for this treaty, it was forbidden and to use slaves, and the slave market in Zanzibar was closed. So, for this brief explanation I gave you today, it will help you to understand the causes for the abolition of slave trade. So I would like you to subscribe, to comment, and to share with other people, so as many students could benefit from this video. Thank you for watching.